Hey everybody, we are live. This is the first of a new roundtable series that I'm doing because that's what you guys said you wanted at the conference. We listened to you, and we're going to be doing some more community building events. I have a couple of special guests on, and we're also next year going to be doing some in-person events. We'll announce that at a later date when we're ready to do that, but we'll be traveling to you to do some in-person speaking engagements. We'll have some nice after dinner parties and things like that. So riding shotgun with me as my co-host today is Yarra Venne from Arcadia Economics. Yarra, how are you doing today?
Rob, I'm doing wonderful. I get to hang out with you and Dave, two of my smartest, favorite people and coolest friends. So I'm beaming. And also just thinking about building community and after coming off of your awesome conference makes me smile too. So glad to be with you both.
Thank you so much for joining. And it looks like you got your son today. Are you solar powered up?
I am solar powered up. Thank you.
Okay. And Dave Kranzler from Investment Research Dynamics rejoins the program. Thank you, Dave, for joining. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for inviting me on to your inaugural show.
You're welcome. And today we're going to be talking about the death of the dollar, but we wanted to make this more community oriented and have fun. And we've been playing around with social media today, asking questions. How did you learn about how the monetary system works? So if you guys want to ask questions in the chat, we'll be paying attention to that, and super chats are open as well. If you really want to get our attention, we'll definitely ask your question on the air of our two esteemed guests here. So before we get into that though, I wanted to just generally see how you guys are doing just generally with the market. How are you feeling? And this is not, market data or anything like that. I'll start with you, Yara. How do you feel right now in terms of where we are with this market? Does this seem like a normal market to you? Do you think that we're hitting any special sort of inflection point, or what's your general feel of the economy and the market right now?
That's a great question. It seems to me as though things might look vaguely familiar, but rather unprecedented at the same time is the energetic kind of vibe I get from it. Because I keep hearing, I pay a lot of attention to what the language people like you and Dave and, Chris and other people that are in my direct sphere use. And I'm hearing a lot more, maybe head shaking, but at the same time, I think people feel like it's rather uncharted waters because, we've never printed this much money this fast, and we're watching, stonks always go up, and the whole vibe of it seems like very frenzied to me. And I think, in the PM space, like metals people seem relatively depressed or euphoric. So you've got these like interesting kind of dichotomies going on as far as, just from a layperson's perspective. But I've been paying attention to the words people have been using, and I feel like something big is happening currently.
I do too. I almost feel as though it's a recognition that things have changed in some way without maybe being able to put our finger on it and say exactly what that is. Right. But it's almost as though we are, in a way, spiritually or just energetically, we're getting, there is change afoot, and you can kind of feel it. I mean, I talk to people, I'm out here traveling once again, as I have been mostly for the last year and a half. And I just get the feeling that people see the world a little bit differently or feel it's different. It's like when we talk about things, even general conversation, people are like, this is not like my childhood. Things have changed here. What has changed? And I think they feel that there is a big sea change going on, but they're not able to process it in real time. Like maybe this is very quickly going on.
I definitely agree with that. I don't know that we have anything to really grasp onto, so there's a lot of kind of, I don't know, kind of energy, but with a sort of anticipatory vibe to it as well.
So Dave, before we get into me asking about the market, I want to know how your tennis game is going.
Oh man, I'm nursing a pulled adductor muscle right now, so I haven't been able to play all week. I'm taking a week off, and I'm hoping that's going to be enough. It probably won't be, but I'll test it out early next week.
What's an abductor muscle? I've never heard of that before.
It's I just started calling it an adductor muscle because it's a pulled groin muscle, and
Okay.
I was getting snide remarks from tennis buddies when I said I got a strained groin muscle, and so
Well, you got to stretch, Dave, before you get out there and play.
I do. I don't know how it happened. I really don't. Probably because I'm getting old.
You know,
Dave, we need you in good shape for your tennis match at Silverfest. Not to interrupt you, Rob, but this is very
that's
important.
right. Yeah. Is it going to be, are we going to get to play Dave in a tournament?
There's an auction to get to play Dave in a tournament.
Oh, count me in for the auction.
All right.
Do we have a starting bid? Do you know what the starting bid is?
No, I was actually just on the a Zoom call for like an hour and a half with the people who were helping us plan it on site, but I have
Awesome.
a time. I don't necessarily have the bid started yet. But Dave, you get to play at night. I'm not going to make you play at like 2 PM under like the hot Puerto Vallarta sun.
Oh, I don't
You can
mind.
play under the lights instead.
Either way, I don't mind the heat.
Okay. Well,
we got to get well, Dave. So I think you're arranging a big tennis tournament here in a few weeks. So you had to be ready for that.
Yes. End of September.
So wanted to ask you about the market. Similar kind of question, just before we get into details. This year seems different. Am I correct in that, Dave? Is it more the same, or what's your feeling on that?
Are you talking about everything or the stock market or?
Yeah, I've been covering this for 12 years and I don't know if I've ever seen a year like this, honestly. Everything just seems, well, I feel like I'm in Alice in Wonderland world. And I was, I was hanging out playing golf. One of my daughter's friends who's in the TV industry with her is an ambassador for Topgolf. And so when they're traveling, he'll find a Topgolf and invite people to go play and gets to play for free. So we're playing for 3 or 4 hours. And we were just talking about stuff and they're, not market mavens or anything, but they're like, yeah, stuff doesn't seem to react like it normally does. Because we got to talking about the stock market, like, yeah, it just goes up, and no matter what happens, it goes up. And people can't believe, I think even the average person is seeing that this market doesn't behave like it has in the past. It's almost like no matter what we throw at it, it's a robo market. It's going to go up no matter what.
Obviously it's a direct result of all the money printing from the Fed. I just saw a chart earlier today and it showed the Fed balance sheet versus the NASDAQ. And it's especially say for the last 6 months, it's like almost a 1-to-1 correlation in terms of just going up. This market, well, first of all, it's a misnomer to call it a market. And that's because the federal, the central banks led by the Federal Reserve have completely removed valid price discovery from this market. And it starts with the Treasury market. They've got the short end pinned to zero with by having their Fed funds rate, which the effective Fed funds rate has fallen down to something like 0.06%. And that reverberates through the rest of the curve. And the Fed has bought since March 2020, the Fed's bought 57% of all new Treasury issuance. And so, where would yields be on the long end if the Fed was not buying Treasury bonds? Yields would be considerably higher. It'd be more likely that yields on the long end would not only, let's just take the 10-year. The 10-year, what was the latest annualized inflation rate, like 5% or something, whatever the CPI is? Well, first of all, the Treasury market ultimately can sniff out that the real rate of inflation is higher than what the CPI is showing us. But minimally at the long end, you'd probably have, you'd be at least at 5% probably, because historically, Treasury bond investors aren't going to buy Treasuries if they're going to have a negative real rate on them, a negative yield. And so, if you take the CPI and then, John Williams calculates inflation the way it was calculated in 1990. And his number is more like 10%. So, you buy a 10-year bond for, the yield's what, about 1.3 right now, 1.35.
Yeah.
So you're basically at north of a 8% negative real rate of return on that bond.
Mm.
So,
and is that why the Fed's having to buy 57%? Because everybody else is like, screw this, we're not getting a real rate of return.
It's not.
We're gonna seek return elsewhere, right?
That's part of it, but right, and that also pushes more money into the stock market. But also, the Fed has to do its best to keep down the borrowing costs for the government. I mean, imagine what the interest rate nut would be annually if the Fed was pay, or if the Treasury had to pay 5 or 6% on 10 years instead of 1.35% on 10 years, and close to zero for bills. And how anyone puts money in Treasury bills or any part of the Treasury curve is beyond me, other than the only thing I can think of is you're not, pension funds have allocation restrictions. So they have to have some, a fair amount of money in fixed income. But also I think there's a component where you got a lot of people who put, sophisticated, wealthy investors who put money into T-bills because they know, the government's not going to default on it. You're going to at least get your money back, right? So, I think they just kind of ignore the negative real rate of return. So you don't have valid price discovery in the Treasury market, and you don't, for the most part, have valid price discovery in the stock market at all. And when price discovery does hit a stock, we saw it like with GameStop last night. It was down, after it reported its earnings, I don't know, something like 15% or something in after hours. So, but a lot of that money that the Fed is printing transmits into the stock market. And so this stock market actually feels very similar to the way it felt in late 1999 and early 2000. And I was day trading back then, tech stocks from the short side, of course. And I just remember it was like, well, first of all, from November of 1999 until March 2000, when the tech sector peaked and then the bubble popped, the NASDAQ, I believe it doubled. So, and it would be like, it's like now you wake up every day and the NASDAQ opens up green and it gets more green during the day. Today, it actually sold off in the afternoon and went red, but which could be a bearish sign. But it feels a lot like that. I'd wake up every single day and and I'd buy puts on certain stocks before the market closed. And I, thinking tomorrow's got to be the day this thing starts to reverse. Boom, the NASDAQ would be up 1% again. It just seemed like every single day the NASDAQ was going up 1%. And that's kind of how it feels now. Now it's the scale is much larger because there's been so much more money printed, and technology has and social media has brought so many more participants into the market. So at some point, this thing is going to rip and reverse. And all these newly minted Einsteins on Twitter who brag about day trading and making a lot of money on these stupid stocks like AMC and GME, they're gonna lose everything. It will happen. I mean, it happened when the tech sector popped in 2000.
I remember that.
Are you
I lost
saying that
that
it's not an all-time high every day?
Yeah.
Is that what you're
Pardon?
trying to say? that it's not going to be an all-time high every day?
Eventually,
I remember I lost 40%.
The trigger's going to be, but you were saying you learned your lesson in the tech bubble.
Yeah, I lost 40% of my portfolio. I was brand new investor, young guy, relatively young guy in the 20s. I grew up poor, so I finally had some money back then to invest, put it into Janus funds at the advice of my advisor.
Oh no.
And Janus was the longest running successful mutual fund at a whopping eight or 9 years.
Yep.
And I learned about the 5,000 year gold cycle later on when I got burned. So I lost 40% of my wealth in the span of like 2 months during the tech.
40% is not bad. I saw a study. No. I saw a study a couple of years after the whole thing, and it said that the retail investors who were considered themselves day traders during the tech bubble lost 95% of them lost 95% of their money. So 40% is not bad.
It's not at all. And so anyway, I agree with you. I think all the signs are there, and I'm glad you pointed that out. It looks like the tech crash. It looks like the mortgage crash in a lot of ways. The irrational exuberance, as we talk about in the market, the momentum trading, the lack of value trading anymore. Nobody value trades. Nobody seems to care about the commodities complex and staples and, things that we always value. When I was growing up, things that we always valued. And when I studied, Peter Lynch and all the value investors, it was value invest. And we're in the stage now where value investing doesn't work and no one cares. It's how high can you beat a stock up, just like Wall Street Bets took, what was it, GameStop and AMC. They weren't valuable stocks, but they drove it up just to make money. And the same thing happens in the cryptos, right? So we're at that spot that the market's got to reverse at some point. It's got to crash at some point. I agree with you there. But going beyond that, there seem to be other things that are indicating maybe it's the death of the dollar. So I'm gonna ask Yarra this question. I had a tweet earlier today about a zero hedge story that came out yesterday where the National Archives has put a hazardous language warning on the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution.
Saw that.
Because that's got bad language. We don't want to talk freedom and rights and things like that. And what's your thought on that, Yarra? I mean, this is a big change culturally. This is not a market thing. This is how, we interact with each other and how we exist and the rules for how, we all get along.
I was so shocked when I saw you post that. And I think I replied immediately that was a huge surprise to me because I grew up, in the Beltway, and I went to public and private schools and took civics. And I have at least 5 pocket copies of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. I think we had to read the Federalist Papers, but I still have those because it's great to have a pocket constitution. So to think about the fact that the documents that our nation was founded on are no longer they're not safe for work, or however they want to label stuff to make it seem like these are antiquated concepts. It's kind of like, instead of revisionist history, they're basically trying to invalidate history or say we didn't, that's not appropriate for now. And it made me sad for our country because I did grow up in DC, and I really grew up believing in the principles of freedom and liberty and justice for all. And actually, even before I was in school, the first public speaking I did was I read this poem about liberty. I tried to remember the name of it right now. I'm going to share it with you because I have the recording of it. It's something by William Tyler Page. And I memorized it when I was 2.5. So I wish I remembered the title, but when I said the words, even as a small child, liberty and justice, for all, you feel those words and the power behind it. And when we go back and we say this isn't applicable for our current time, or this isn't appropriate anymore, that I feel really cuts straight at the Achilles or the knees. It's going low to try to take out the very basis of who we are as a people, and that seems like a bad trend to me. But it made me sad.
Yeah, it was really. I saw that and I'm like, goodness gracious, what are we doing? And Dave, I guess the follow-up question I have for you is, if we change as a culture so much that we're repudiating where we came from and the basis of what made us strong in the first place, how does that affect the currency? Can the currency survive in that environment?
Good question. Let me get back to that in a second, because the first thing I thought of when I saw that story was George Orwell. Orwell wrote about this in 1984, and he wrote 1984 in the mid 1940s. So essentially he was saying, this is what's eventually going to happen. And this is a quote: "Every record has been destroyed or falsified, every book rewritten, every picture has been repainted, every statue and street building has been renamed, or in our case, they're just removing statutes and destroying them. Every date has been altered, and the process is continuing day by day and minute by minute. history has stopped. So, I mean, that's what we're living 1984 right now. So, to circle back to your question, I mean, the fiat currency is, I don't know that the dollar necessarily reflects our culture per se. It is, it's essentially the currency, the US dollar is basically a means of transacting, right? And it's a dishonest currency because there's nothing that gives it value other than full faith and credit. And certainly, I guess to your point, to an extent, more and more people are starting to lose their full faith and credit in the United States government, and therefore they're going to lose their full faith and credit in using the US dollar. So, I mean, essentially, the currency is a dishonest currency. It's a Ponzi scheme. The Fed can create as much as it needs to now to do what it wants with. It's not anchored in anything. I mean, theoretically, it's supposed to be anchored to the wealth output, right? The currency, when you have a currency or money, it's supposed to represent, the marginal output of wealth of a system. And in our case, they've printed money so fast, and this, on a real inflation adjusted basis, our GDP has been contracting. So it's a fraudulent currency. And honestly, our entire system has become fraudulent. I mean, look at all the fraud and corruption out there that's blatant. It's open. It's in the open now. I mean, the policymakers and the elitists, they don't care that we know that they're operating corruptly and fraudulently. So, I mean, essentially, I guess in that sense, the US dollar perfectly reflects what our culture and our society has become, which it's become, fraudulent.
I want to get into some of the questions and comments we have here in the chat. We've got about 150 people joining. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this first of the Roundtable Series we'll be doing, where we do live and I bring on a different guest for you guys to interact with. Cuckoo69 says, and this is more of a comment, but I wanted to get y'all's thoughts. He says, my worst fear is if we're witnessing the death of the dollar. As a Canadian, I'm even more fearful with an already weak exchange rate. So translating that into a topic, what happens to the rest of the currencies if the dollar goes? Is this a domino effect?
Yarra?
I was just about to defer to you. I
Mike?
don't really, I don't know that. So I will ask someone with a higher pay grade.
Well, when I first got into the precious metal sector, you guys have probably heard of Jim Dines. He was a long time newsletter writer. And I mean, if you believe his hype, he says he predicted the 1987 crash, the tech crash, blah, 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 whatever. He may have, he may not have. I just know that when I was learning about the precious metal sector and the mining stocks, he actually started advocating precious metals and mining stocks in the late 90s. And so I subscribed to his newsletter, and this is the early 2000s. And one of the things that he emphasized was that we're going to see a race to zero amongst all the fiat currencies of the world. And so essentially that's what we're seeing we're seeing a race to zero. I mean, and if you look at I was just to address Cuckoo69, I was, the Canadian dollar actually up until June was very strong against versus the dollar.
Yes, it was.
And now, for whatever reason, we've had some dollar strength. I would argue that a big part of that is direct intervention from the Fed and the Exchange Stabilization Fund. But so there's been a bounce in the dollar since June. But over a longer term, I mean, the dollar has, and this chart is taking me back to 1996, but since the early 2000s, 2002, the Cando has outperformed the dollar. And I would surmise, if I run this chart against a lot of different currency pairs, the dollar's down against them. Where's the euro? obviously against gold, it's way down since 2001. So, right, it's lost 98% of its value since 1971 versus the dollar. Just looking at the British pound, which is a crap currency also, but I mean the dollar, actually the dollar has gone up versus the pound, so that's not a good example. Here's the euro. So yeah, I mean, since 2002, the euro's outperformed the dollar. So, you know, and it's just, and then if you just look at the dollar index, you see long-term what's happened to that. So, and that's reflecting the erosion of the value of these currencies because of money printing. So, and it seems like supposedly the ECB said they were going to pull back on their bond buying, you know, and they didn't quantify it. So I'm skeptical, and I'll believe it when I actually see it. But if they start to do that, you know, and the US keeps printing, the dollar's going to go down versus the euro. So it's the famous Voltaire quote, fiat currencies, or I think he termed it paper money, eventually always reaches its long-term value, which is zero. So, and that's where we're headed with this system. So, and you've done some brilliant work in terms of ferreting out and explaining, you know, what is probably is in the works in terms of the Great Reset. And you know, I think what's happening now is a precursor for that.
Rob, can I speak to that question really quick now that I've had a second to think about it?
Yes, you may.
The language of it, which
Go
is,
for it.
I think a lot of people right now are verbalizing their greatest fears.
Mm-hmm.
And that, if you want to go back to taking kind of the temperature of what's going on in general, I don't, in my personal existence on this planet this time, remember talking to so many people that were fearful or had their biggest fear as in the forefront of their mind at any other time in my life. You know, so whether it's is the dollar going to take everything else down with it, or am I going to be able to travel with my family, or whatever it is, people are being confronted with their fears, and I think warrantedly so. But just going back to where we started, you know, I kind of feel like that's a thing that might be a barometer also for just where people are at. So, you know, the euphoria in the stock market might feel like almost like a drug or like an antidote to the fact that really most of what we're seeing just doesn't make sense.
That's why I wanted to have you on the program, Yarra, because your insight, your ability to kind of see and feel and intuit what people are thinking and to understand, you go beyond the headlines, but to understand how people are reacting to stuff. And it seems to me you're right that fears are at the forefront of people's minds. And for example, we just had a question from Michael Sayre, one of our moderators, around a potential government shutdown if they can't approve the budget. That's that's a fear question that Michael asked, and it's a legitimate question because it's been in the news. And I don't know, I think it was Yellen commenting on that. Oh my God, the world's going to end. There's a lot of that fear. Some of that is our apprehension over what we see and what we intuit ourselves using our own filters of the world. But some of that is fear mongering driven by the state. In your view, how much of this do you think it could be driven intentionally? And could there ever be a reason for that?
I feel like a lot of it is intentional, and it's because people don't think about things in a rational sense when they're coming from a fear place. And so I think if people are in their rational headspace, then they're going to be critical thinkers. They're going to look at what's actually happening and maybe make some very different decisions than they would make in a fear or a panic-based situation, because flight and fright is the exact opposite of rest and restore. And like, you can only, you know, the reason why we meditate is to get into a clear headspace so that we can then make, you know, right decisions instead of being influenced. And I think the people who are benefiting from people's fear are the same people who are generating people's fear. And so if you want to look at it as a fear ecosystem, it basically takes a lot of what would our normal resources going, mental, emotional, spiritual resources going towards bettering our lives, this or that. If we're in that fear space, then we're going to be in reaction mode. And in reaction mode, you're really easy to manipulate. And so, I don't want to.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
I mean, we're to a point now where, a headline could send the whole, half the country off in one direction immediately, right? So we're all on the verge of being triggered at almost every moment due to the ambient level of fear that's always being presented to us as you need to be afraid of this and this and this, and then we can't think about how we do things proactively for ourselves and for our betterment. And so I feel like it's a prescription of fear.
It's the old Hegelian dialectic. You set the goalpost and you set the agenda, and you force people into that agenda, and don't let them think outside the box, right?
Right.
They don't look at the whole universe.
You're either this or that. And the people who are like, I'm neither of those, we have very little representation. Although I will say that people like us can make a difference by being ourselves in the world and not falling prey to whatever is meant to make us panic at this any given moment, because then we are going to make good decisions for ourselves, which then ripple out into the world when people see like, oh, those guys aren't freaking out. What do they know that I don't? And so, we don't necessarily have to go out and evangelize for anything, but I think people in the midst of their panic will notice the calm or the thoughtfulness or basically the antithesis of what they're feeling and want that. And that could start some really great conversations and potentially lead to some really, monumental changes.
Good. Great answer. Thank you. Dave, do you think that there's a chance that the government will shut down because of the budget issue? And if it did, hypothetically speaking, what would happen?
Well, we saw that. I can't remember what year it was, but the government shut down temporarily because Congress was at an impasse on raising the debt ceiling. I just can't remember what year that was. And that was the only time it happened. And ever since then, they've either, raised it after a lot of political grandstanding and chip gathering for future favors. Or I think Trump just suspended it for a while, if I recall. One of the recent presidents just suspended it. So I mean, I think it was Trump. So when you suspend it, I mean, that just means the government can borrow as much as it wants, and then at a later date, Congress will negotiate a new debt ceiling, that's well above the existing level of debts after, during the suspension period. So I agree with Yarra. I think it's another fear device to get people to, to do for them to, further control people, by controlling their emotions. And it'd be great if they shut down the government. I'd like to see them stop spending. Be fantastic, right?
That would be a good thing, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it certainly wouldn't be a bad thing. But I think ultimately, however they get around to doing it, whatever device they use, suspension or, eventually reach, some political compromises and a formal raise of the debt ceiling. Just keep in mind that these congressmen, their salaries are paid from debt issuance, right? Mm-hmm. So if the government can't spend any more money, that means they don't get paid. And I don't think they're going to let that happen to themselves.
They're not voluntarily in any case.
Right.
We have a question from Sarge, who's one of our really good followers. And thank you, Sarge, for joining us so many times on the program. We definitely want to get your question answered. In the spirit of the death of the dollar and maybe global reset, you mentioned, Dave, and transition into the new system. Sarge asks, what does Dave think of the CCB and the BOCOM implementing the EU yuan, or basically the digital currency?
Well, I wish I had saved the article. I don't remember where I read it. It might have been a GATA dispatch, but China's beta testing their digital currency in one of their provinces right now. So, I mean, it's on the way. I think if you're going to have a system or a currency which is backed by a monetary system that's backed by gold, and I ultimately think that's where we're headed. Having a digital currency is a much cleaner way of doing it than having the type of fiat currency we have, paper currency. And it's interesting because that whole aspect to what you explained about what's going on was that the digital currencies allow them to take interest rates negative to force people to spend at times when they want to try and juice the economy. I just saw an article about that literally just yesterday that was discussing that. So, and
what it does is it allows them to get outside of the constraints of the debt system and just control the monetary flow. And
right.
anytime they want, however they want. And it basically allows them almost instantaneous control using electronic means of the flow of money.
Exactly. And if the people who are private crypto, Bitcoin, et cetera, advocates, if they think that means there's going to be room for Bitcoin in a world where we have central bank digital currencies, they're badly mistaken.
Yeah.
But back to Serge's question, I mean, it's clearly it looks like China is at the forefront right now in terms of transitioning their system to a digital currency. And I've seen arguments made out there that they're going to back it with gold. And that's kind of what I always thought. Back in 2002, 2003, when I really had learned a lot about the world of precious metals and the dark side of the financial system, I had concluded that at some point China was going to, they were going to reset the monetary system with a gold-backed currency. And, they would say, look, feel free to trade with us, but you have to show us that your currency is backed by gold, which the U.S. wouldn't be able to do. And so it makes sense to me that, that they'll get the digital currency working and then they'll back it with gold is what I think will happen.
Yeah, I agree with you. We could talk a lot about the currency system that's coming into play. I think that may actually be a topic for another show, because I think there's so much there to talk about, and it's going to be so complex of a system that we should take that topic and break it out on a future show if you want to, Dave. Because you
probably need, you could probably do justice to it in 45 minutes.
Yeah.
As you say, there's a lot to unpack.
There is a lot to unpack. So we had a comment from Raymond Chamas: take care of yourselves so that you may take care of others. Thank you, Raymond, for that comment and the donation to the program. We have a question from Fat Vegan. I'm going to save for the end because it's a mining stock one, Dave, and I want to get into that with you. So Fat, stay tuned to the end. We'll get to your question. I saw it come through. Getting back to the system, and the system we think is undergoing great change, and maybe the death of the dollar, maybe the digital dollar, whatever the case may be, we know we're going through a time of change. And so my social media manager kind of senses, she's very intuitive as well, and asked a question on social media. And it was basically, tell us your experience with the banking system or the currency and how, how it actually works. And there was this really cool response on our YouTube community by Fazdal. So I'm just going to read this response. It's very funny. He says, when I was 8, and this is in the late 70s, my father helped me open my first savings account at the teller window of a local bank. It paid 5% interest. And I asked my dad where they got the money to pay me that 5%. Dad said they took my money, let someone else borrow for 12%, and then they paid me 5% out of the 12%. And I got pretty mad, and that's why I only got 5% while they got 7%. After all, if I didn't have any money in the bank, they would have nothing to lend out and nothing to collect 12% on, right? So my dad grinned and told me to go ask the lady in the nice suit at the big brown desk. So I marched over and spent the next 5 minutes screaming, where the hell is my 7%? That's my money. You owe me 7% at the loan officer, unwittingly entertaining all the adults there. So I guess when I was 8, I found out how my money should work. I didn't figure out how it really worked until 2003. So what was your guys' moments, your individual moments of figuring out how the system worked and like, where the hell is my 7%?
Well, first of all, don't kids just like really understand things at the very core level in the most beautiful way? Like you could talk circles around, somebody who's gone to college who is trying to intellectualize the things that you're saying and rationalize it in their own heads. But kids are like, where's my damn 7%? So I love that story. But also I think, it is to a certain degree like a little bit of brainwashing that has gone on as to like, no, this is how banking works. And they try to make it seem a little bit too complicated, or maybe you just don't understand it. And they use acronyms and kind of try to herd people into the products that work best for them and what have you. But I love that story. My first situation was I had babysitting money. And so I also went and opened a savings and a checking account. And I wanted to go to London to visit my best friend whose dad was now the ambassador there instead of to America. And I found out I could get more interest by buying like short term or doing like short term like loans or something like that. So I don't even know what they were called, but my banker was really cool. But he was like, if you want more money, if you buy this for 3 months, you'll get this much back. And I was like, well, I don't need my money and I want more money. So let's do that. And so, my education was kind of like based off of, I want to go to London and I want more money now, or in 3 months. And so I kept doing those. And every time I would get another, $500 or something, I would do that. And I was like, well, this is a decent deal, but I love Mary Poppins. And I remember the bank rush scene when the kids want their tuppence back. And they started, the whole bank rush. And I thought about it, those two things together. And I'm like, well, I can't really get my money out of the bank until 2 months later if I really wanted it. And so after I kind of put those two pieces together, I decided not to do that anymore. But that was sort of my introduction, was as a, fifth or sixth grader who really just wanted more money than I had. And they sold me those products, but you can't even get those anymore, I would imagine.
You're lucky if you get 0.25%, Yarra.
Yeah. But it seemed like a good deal at the time. But now once I started understanding that like they were using my money, the reason I was getting paid more is because I couldn't have my money. Like that's when it kind of clicked with me that I'm not so sure that this is in my best interest.
What about you, Dave? When did you realize that, you weren't getting the 7% the bankers were getting?
Oh, well, I started working on Wall Street in 1985. So I knew, I understood the game. I loved the fact that banks could make such a huge, easy spread using other people's money. Right. That's the name of the game, OPM. So for me, it's really more of a question of when did I realize that a fiat currency system doesn't work, or what people erroneously call money doesn't work. And that would be the early 2000s when I got dragged kicking and screaming into the precious metal sector. And I started, researching around the edges of it. And the more and more I researched, the more fascinated I became. And then, it took me a couple of years to completely get on the dark side, but I'd say probably 2003, maybe late 2002 is when I realized we're eventually really screwed.
I could just see you in a Darth Vader costume, Dave, holding up your gold coin. I have no problem. That's a good segue into precious metals. And I want to ask you a question, Yarra. You're very big into silver. So you're part of Arcadia Economics, which is this fantastic informational research service for people that I think in many ways took the old style of talking about precious metals and made it new. You and Chris have done a wonderful job at that. And I think really revolutionized this industry and who you're attracting to it and expanded it beyond what it was. No offense to the older generation, but you guys have kind of brushed it off, polished it, given it a nice gleam. And
we put on our power bracelets.
That's right. So silver is good long-term savings, potentially investment. It's got practical uses, but beyond that, and something I was researching silver years ago, and I had an infographic made was that silver plays more of a role. It plays a role in culture. It plays a role in our consciousness. There are mystical elements to silver. People worship silver for a long time. So beyond the practical uses of silver, what does silver mean to you?
Wow, that's such a great question. And I got goosebumps. So it definitely resonated. Well, one of the things that's so exciting to me.
Nice one.
Ooh,
Is that a 10 ouncer?
tiny.
The 10 ouncer.
Ooh,
One of my subscribers sent it to me.
Nice.
very nice.
That's a wonderful gift.
I know.
Silver is like the best gift as far as I'm concerned. But I was always naturally attracted to silver, even as a child, even though all of my family members were kind of dripping in gold. I always felt very attracted to silver, as well as to the ocean and to the moon. Like I've always been just like magnetized to the moon or zone out into the ocean. And when I realized I had those same propensities, it made me wonder about it when I was still pretty young. But the silver actually has similar properties to the moon and to the ocean. It's got an ebb and flow to it, just like the new moon to the full moon, back to the new moon. That's a full cycle, right? Or the way that the waves come in sets. And I've also, now that I've been in the precious metals for a while, I've realized a lot of people who love silver have some, have ridden emotional roller coasters, or maybe are, drawn to those kinds of things, even in other avenues of their life that might be kind of peak and trough kind of energy and vibration. But the cool thing about silver is it's very receptive and very intuitive. It's also connected to what's called the divine feminine. And that doesn't mean female. It's the divine feminine aspect in both of us or in all of us. And in a healthy society, we would have an even balance. And for the last about 13,000 years, it's been very gold focused, masculine, forward facing, kind of like push it till you make it work, like getting, like, who cares if I have a square peg and a round hole? I'm just going to pound it till it works. And that's been kind of the energy that we've been in. But we've recently flipped the switch into the more divine feminine era. And so sometimes when I hear people talking about the gold silver ratio, it makes a lot of sense throughout time because gold had more force and stick-to-itiveness and maybe was more stable. But with the changing time that we're having and the rising of the divine feminine, which equals divine balance, it's not like we're all going to be feminized or anything like that. It's just a divine balance coming into play. I think with what I understand about the properties of silver and the vibrations that make up everything, I feel like we're at a time when silver is really getting more of a solid footing because of the change in the vibration overall. And so when I first met Chris and he introduced me to silver as, a scarce resource that was undervalued and all of the fundamentals that we know, plus it gets used and, all of the other bullet points that make silver amazing. My reaction to that was, oh yeah, well, and also now it's silver's time to rise. This is a thing that has had historical value. It was money, it is money. And I think it's going to come back in full circle to being something that people understand the value of, instead of believing that it's not valuable based off of what we now know, is a lot of paper manipulation. So vibrationally speaking, I'm super thrilled to be involved with silver because one, I'm very balanced. And so, it doesn't affect me as much, the waves and the crashes and the tamps and, all of that doesn't really affect me as much. But I think it's also a great opportunity for us to really understand the fact that everything is vibration. And when vibrations are harmonious, that's when we, get to a place where we have a better existence. And I feel like silver is a big piece of that for that reason.
Yeah, so I'm going to make a comment on that, and I'm going to ask Dave a couple of questions about the mining stocks. My comment on that is that was a great response because we talked about fear. and we talked about imbalance, and that was the theme of the show.
Mhm.
And when I read some of the great philosophers and they talk about the great feminine, what they talk about the great feminine is that nurturing and healing power that tends to rise in societies when you most need it.
Yeah,
And
when it's unstable, that's
yes.
when, you can also think of it as the Mother Earth kind of like wrapping her
Mhm.
arms around it and calming us, and it's got a lot of that energy in it as well, because that's what the water does. Like that's the water element, is it
Water
soothes.
washes over you and
Yeah,
it adapts, and that,
soothes. It
do you,
fills different shaped spaces, it adapts.
yes.
All
Do
of
you
that.
do you think people turning to silver and the precious metals is them reacting to the imbalances that we've had in society? We could talk about monetarily,
Yes.
we could talk about politically and culturally, all of those hard, tangible things. Do you think people from an intuitive perspective say, I got to go to the precious metals because this is going to balance, the uncertainties that I have, and that's why we've had sort of a resurgence into gold and silver?
I could definitely see that, and it maybe even without the conscious thought of it, but
Mhm.
but almost like being magnetically, vibrationally attracted to something like that.
Mhm.
Like when you put silver into someone's hand instead of explaining to them all of the reasons why they would want it, so that gets processed mentally, right? And that's
Yeah,
the
like when David held it
ego
up, there's
mind.
something about having
Yeah,
it
we were all like,
in, it changes you.
ooh.
It
It does.
changes you. It changes the way that you think about things when you're holding, I'll say even gold or silver, but especially silver.
Real. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think vibrationally we're attracted to that almost magnetically because of that element of it does feel it it literally affects every cell in your body. And I mean, as a crystal healer and as a Reiki master, I've seen that in other ways, but with silver, I feel like there's a softness to it. It almost takes the
Mhm.
edge off a little bit.
Mhm.
But I think the attraction that we feel to it is maybe mental, but maybe far more on a soul level. Like this is something I need for me right now to reach that equilibrium while I'm feeling out of whack.
Awesome. Great answer. So Dave, I'm going to turn to you with some mining stock questions because you have the Mining Stock Journal at Investment Research Dynamics. And whenever you come on the program, people ask mining stock questions. So I'm going to hit you with two and just let you answer as you wish. So Fat Vegan has asked this question before the other guests, and he asked it again today. The first question is, will carbon credits play a major role in the mining companies? And the second question and or comment that we had a couple of times is, the precious metals companies are making lots of money. When will it be their time?
I don't know if I can answer either of those questions with certainty.
I give you the tough ones, Dave.
I like the name Fat Vegan, though. I didn't know there were fat vegans out there.
Me neither. I thought being vegan meant you were in balance.
It's with a PH. It means he's super cool, like from the 90s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Got it. See, I didn't see the name itself.
Well,
I just heard
he's
the name.
in our chat often too.
Okay, got it. In terms of the carbon credits, I have no idea. Honestly, I mean, I know this is a politically incorrect answer, but I don't really pay that much attention to what's going on with ESG and carbon credits, other than as it relates to the EV industry. So, and I don't know if there's been talk about allocating carbon credits to to mining companies for whatever reasons. I mean, to start up a mining operation, you have to go through a pretty rigid environmental licensing permitting process. So, and it's there's no way to get around it. I mean, mining is not environmentally friendly. And that's what's so funny about all these EV people thinking they're like being green, driving EVs. Well, as it turns out, lithium and cobalt mining is worse for the environment than gold and silver mining. So,
and you can't recycle the batteries, at least as of yet.
That's a whole other issue. And now that the early generation EVs and Teslas the batteries are starting to die. We're going to find out pretty quickly, what recycling is all about. I mean, it's so at any rate, in terms of the question on the mining stocks, and profitability, et cetera, I mean, the cycle that we're going through right now, I mean, and this is, I mean, really the last, what is it, September? So the last 5 months have been especially brutal, but we've been in a downtrend since August 2020. And we've seen, there's been plenty of periods like this. I wouldn't say plenty, but there's been several periods like this since 2001 when I jumped into the sector. The summer of 2006 was brutal. The fall and summer of 2008, I don't know how many people in the audience remember that, but that was, I mean, gold went from 1,200 down to 700, and silver went from, I think, 21 down to 7. And then obviously the big one was late 2011 to the start of 2016. And that's been the worst period. And I don't even know how many people in the audience were around then, but I mean, there were, colleagues of mine who were semi-suicidal by the middle of 2015, wondering, and a lot of people just gave up on the sector. And we're actually starting to see that a little bit right now, which to me is a good sign. It's a contrarian signal. So, and then you had August 2018 to May 2019, and that was a pretty rough period. But what we're going through now is eventually going to pass, and I think the entire mining stock sector is an incredibly good value right now. I had a chart demonstrating my argument in my last mining stock journal. It was a chart comparing the XAU to the S&P 500 that went all the way back to 1973.
Yeah.
And I mean, the mining stocks right now, the mining stock sector, the companies that actually produce metal and throw off cash flow, it's the only sector in the stock market that has a positive cash flow yield on their assets, return on their assets. And at some point, that's not going to go unnoticed by large cap investors. And I don't know if it's going to take a washout, in everything, including the stock market. And there's always the risk of that. It's not going to sit here and tell you that if the stock market crashes, all the money is going to flow into the mining stocks. We're going to see, another down leg in the mining stocks like we saw in February and March of 2020. I mean, everything went down, but then the mining stocks rebounded. And for several quarters, the mining stock sector was by far the best performing sector in the stock market. And we're going to see that again.
Yes.
In terms of timing, I mean, I have no idea. A good example is Fortuna Silver. I mean, that thing was almost at 10, several months ago, and then it announced this merger, and for some reason the market didn't like it. But based on Fortuna's second quarter numbers, and if you assume that their quarters, but just assume the quarter is going to stay the same for the next 3 quarters, on a 12-month forward annualized basis, Fortuna is going to have a 9% cash flow yield. And that's unheard of in the stock market. That's incredible. You were talking about value investing earlier. I mean, that's the poster child of a value stock right there. So, but the stocks are, over shorter periods of time, they're going to be correlated with the stock market if the stock market goes down. So I'm just been advising people to, even though the mining stocks look cheap right now relative to 6 months ago, save cash. I mean, you're going to have plenty of time to make a lot of money in this sector, and no one's going to pick the bottom successfully. People who say they picked the bottom either got really lucky or they're lying. And so, I mean, if you can just get the middle 60% of the next move that we're going to see, it's going to be such a big move. You'll be able to generate lifestyle changing wealth from that. So, I mean, right now, I'd just say, instead of, worrying when this thing's going to be over, when we're going to bottom, when we're going to move higher again, I think at this point, just sit tight and be right. And hopefully you haven't put all your cash into the sector all at once. And because, and even then, I still think you're going to sit tight and be right, and you'll be happy 18 to 24 months from now. But you know, in terms of the timing of this, it's anyone's guess.
I think, Dave, it may relate back to the subject of our video. The timing of that may occur as we witness more of the death of the dollar, because I agree with everything you said, but I think unlike past cycles, we're now in the changing monetary system portion of the cycle. And so I think the precious metals, the mining stocks, all of those, what we see as longer term value, will do very well as that dollar system is phased out and we transition into a new system. There's going to be a ton of uncertainty during that time, I think. And I think that people being in the mining stocks and the metals is probably your safest bet from an investment perspective and a value perspective. And, you know, to reiterate what Yarra said before, there is a psychological, spiritual, if you will, cultural value that humans have had for thousands of years to these metals. And that's not something that's easily just destroyed, dissuaded, discarded, any of those words. You can come up with programmatic, computerized cryptocurrencies. You can come up with fiat dollars, but there's something about those tangible metals that I think people are going to gravitate to from many perspectives, from a financial perspective, economic perspective, safety perspective, cultural perspective, and a self-healing and wellness perspective, a safety perspective, if you will. So I think that's going to wrap it up for this roundtable, guys. It's been an hour. It's been a wonderful hour. First of all, thank you guys for joining. You're the first two that I thought of to do this roundtable series, Dave, because you've been such a stalwart, not only with the Mining Stock Journal, but also with the information that you have brought to people for so long with both of our channels, with Arcadia and Gold Silver Pros. I know I speak for Chris and Yarra when I say thank you for being a part of that with us.
Yeah, I appreciate being invited to be part of it.
And we had you at the conference as well. So we're going to be putting out some of those conference sessions for people. So stay tuned, you know, to the conference sessions we had. Yarra, I think you're going to be in one of those too. So stay tuned. Yarra, thank you so much for joining. You in many ways are such a good friend of mine, and I appreciate you, you know, supporting our channel and being a part of it, and definitely want to support you guys at Arcadia as well. I know that you have an upcoming conference in late October called Silverfest. Maybe we'll hear more about that. Silverfest 2.
Yeah,
the big
live
bash.
and in person.
Dave, are you going to that one?
Silverfest, that's the one in Mexico.
Yeah, you going down to Mexico?
I'm supposed to bring my tennis racket.
That's right. We have the
yeah. So I guess I have. I mean, the only thing that would keep me is from not is if they, you know, if all of a sudden they require a vaccine to enter the country.
Yeah. We'll see about that. I will find a way to get there either way, Yarra. I don't care.
Yeah, I'll be flying to you, and we'll be road tripping if there's any issues. So just so you know, you're not my plan B. You're my other plan. There's no B to it. It's like if I need to do something, I know.
No, happy to be a part of it.
Maybe we can road trip together down to Rob.
So wanted to say thank you to everybody that joined the program. We're doing these for community building. I sensed that we needed to go beyond just education. I sensed that we need to build community. When we had the in-person day of our conference on August 19th, I overwhelmingly, the energy in the room, Yarra, you were there. It was amazing. People getting to break bread with each other and meet and talk to each other. All the hugs that I got, the thank yous, I just was absolutely blown away. I never expected it. And people told me, Rob, we need to build community. We need to build community. So this is what we're doing here. This is part of what we're doing. The road shows will go on next year. We're going to do it in person, is to build a community. And I wanted to take the time to thank our communities. This is a time, I think, of great change, but it doesn't have to be a time of fear and fear-driven decision-making. If we build community, you know, we can get through it. We can help each other through it. We can provide the best information, the best financial advice, but also the best healing advice. And so that we don't get caught in that for our soul, so we don't get caught in that fear stage and make mistakes. So thank you guys so much for joining the channel. We'll see you guys next time. We're going to do one of these probably every 2 weeks. I may ask Yarra to ride shotgun with me again if she consents.
I would be honored.
And Dave, we'll definitely have you back on the program as well. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Love to come on anytime.
All right.
Thank you,
talk to you guys later. I'm about to go watch Dallas get smashed by Tampa Bay. So.
No. They're going to cover the spread.
I think Dave bet on Dallas to cover the spread. So we'll see how
I did.
All right. Thanks, guys. Good night, everybody.